There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of exercises out there that you can do. There's the main ones that we kind of all agree upon, and then there's many different variations from those core movements. I guess you, as a trainee or somebody interested in improving a certain attribute, physical attribute, your goal is to actually pick the certain and the type of exercises that you need. Now you need to sit there and assess your movement pattern. You got to assess where the weakness is and expose those weaknesses through these different exercises. We are no different to a coach, of a football team or a basketball team or any sport endeavor. We're no different to these people who are sitting there and looking at the various different tactics, players, different elements of the game, different oppositions, and literally just moving those chess pieces around the board to, make advantage for us. That's all this whole thing is. And so when we get into discussions, what's better, an RDL or a stiff-legged or a box squat or whatever the case might be, there is no definite answers. It's literally, depends on what tool you need for the job. It's like gardening, man. You're not going to get a pick, to chop a tree down. Like there's an axe, right? Like you take the axe. So it's kind of like that mentality that I think about these types of things. And, I have had to get over a lot of mental barriers to a lot of these different movements based upon my, conceived interpretations, likes, dislikes, understandings. There was a time where I couldn't stand, looking at box squats. There was a time where I couldn't stand looking at West Side. I thought it was an abomination of movement, absolutely disgusting. Olympic weightlifting squat is the only squat that matters, and everything else is just crap. Sumo deadlifts are crap. It's ATG squats, conventional deadlifts, and flat back bench presses. That's kind of where I started. That's kind of what sparked my interest in all of this. And as time has gone on, I've learned, the hard way really, to understand that all these movements have a place. Now, which movements should be tested in a competition is a completely different argument. But I think all of these movements should and could and should really be used in training, depending on the weakness, depending on the individual, depending on the problem at hand. Sumos are great, box squats are great, wide stance squats are great, everything is freaking great. It just depends what the goal is. Somebody like me who has many times said that my freaking sport is the squat. That's my sport. Not a lot of people play that sport, as in just aiming for that. A lot of people do powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, the big arching camps. I just want to get better at the squat. And part of that, goal is a lot of carryover into the deadlift. And this is how my deadlift has gotten to 265. Like, it wasn't because I wanted to improve my deadlift. It was like, okay, how do I get stronger in the squat? In recent days, I've watched once again, I go into this path of thinking, watched a lot of Westside podcasts, Louis Simmons, read a whole bunch of stuff. And once again, I learned things. Like I said in yesterday's video, you revisit some same ideas over and over again. It seems like each time you come back for another spin around, you dig a little bit deeper, you get some more knowledge. It's become apparent to me why my deadlift is what it is. It's because of the stance I choose in the squat. I squat ATG very narrow stance. That carries over to the deadlift. It works out the lower back a lot. One thing that Louis Simmons has both said and I've read is that the narrow stance box squat or low box squat, something around 10 inches, builds your deadlift. Now, the stuff that I'm doing here with the 10-inch box squats is not too far removed or not too dissimilar to my ATG squat. The only difference is there is a definite pause. There is a definite cut between concentric and eccentric. So it makes it a lot more difficult. When I do an ATG pause, even though I am in a pause, there is still some tension through certain muscles, and I feel like it's a lot easier to get out of that position than on a box. On a box, literally I'm sitting, especially if you rock back a little bit, you're literally relaxed in a lot of the major movers. And then re-engaging those muscles is freaking hard work, man. Freaking hard work. So this is where, I think my deadlift strength comes from, is because I choose to go narrow stance ATG. Now, that in itself limits how much I can squat because I am biomechanically very mechanically disadvantaged, right? Like there's a lot of forces which I'm not optimizing. I'm just in very, very bad positions when I do that. However, isn't it interesting that the very struggle that I have in the squat carries over to something else? So this is where, you kind of think to yourself, you can't destroy or create matter. It's just merely just transformations and things moving around. So it's kind of good to know that there's a reason why a lot of these Olympic weightlifters have really strong backs and pull a lot. Obviously, they do a lot of pulling in their sport. Makes sense. But it kind of makes sense. It's almost like a clicking sound in your mind when you think to yourself, a lot of these guys have freaking flat backs in their deadlift and they pull so much. And, this is where it's coming from. Like the more you squat, especially narrow stance and ATG, the better you get at training your back. It just makes sense because the back becomes in a very acute angle. It depends also how you squat. If you squat in stilettos and you send your kneecaps into the next room, you're not going to get the benefits for the deadlift. Why? Because you are making the knee angle really acute, not the back angle. This is where you can have an ATG squat, somebody who's maxed out the range of motion and completely using different muscles. You can have a knee dominant ATG squat and a hip dominant ATG squat. Somebody like me, I don't send my kneecaps into the next room. I just send my ass backwards, and sit down. So my shins are very much vertical, almost vertical like in the ATG position. Whereas I see other people who, shoot their heels up on a whole bunch of ollie shoes or plates or whatever. And their hip angle is rather, like it's almost like 90 degrees, but the knee angle is like, 180 almost, right? So this is where, it's kind of fitting that, I fall in love with the ATG squat, and it's kind of morphed into this whole thing about no gear, flat shoes, all of that. That's where my most fun happens. And now I've kind of realized that same squat, obviously it's very difficult to do, especially if I'm aiming for 300 kilos. But that same squat that I like, that I've fallen in love, has huge carryover to the deadlift, which is why I think, if I've connected the dots correctly, why my deadlift has started moving. And this is why, when I did the 180 kilo 5x5 training earlier in the year, back squat has made my squats really well. My deadlifts really carries over so well. ATG narrow stance carries over so freaking well for the deadlift. Obviously, in a wide stance squat or wider stance squat going to parallel, you can do more squatting, more numbers, because the leverages are more advantageous to you. But how much of that carries over to the deadlift? I don't know how many guys I've met who have, rather similar squat to deadlift ratios. I've met many guys who are like, yeah, I squat 200 and I bench and I deadlift 200. So both squat and deadlift are the same. And I always used to think to myself, how does that make sense, man? Like, is that person just gifted for squatting? That's why the squatting numbers are so high? It could be that. Certainly we see a lot of these guys all around the place. Or is it the way they squat? Maybe they squat in such a way that maximizes the squatting, but it doesn't really train, through secondary effects, the deadlift. So it's interesting. These box squats, what I've learned in the last 2 days that I've done them. Today I did triples. I did 8 triples. The whole idea is to get to that 24, 25 rep total, as Louis, prescribes. So I did that. Yesterday I did freaking 10 sets of 5, so it was like 50 freaking reps, but that was kind of a feel out session. Today, 120 on the bar, 8 triples, and the whole time, like I'm thinking to myself, okay, what's sore right now? What's working? And it's my lower back, man. It is my lower back. It is very heavy on the lower back, and some of you fellas have said, and ladies, there's a few ladies who have reached out as well, who have said that, yeah, box squats have a, potential to injure you. You have to be almost like turned on while sitting on the bench, on the box. You don't want to completely switch off. You got to be switched on in your core while rocking back ever so slightly. Louis says you got to let go of your hip flexors a little bit, but that doesn't mean completely collapsing your lower back. You don't want the lower back to compromise. You got to keep a flat back while rocking a little bit and then going back a little bit. So you are completely removing the weight from that eccentric portion. You don't want to carry energy from the eccentric to the concentric. Completely defeats the purpose of the box squat, as Louis describes. Anyway, so that's all I did today. Just that. Going into a night shift tonight, so I don't want to completely waste myself. That's basically the session today. And I was thinking, I was kind of reading through some of the West Side, articles and whatnot, and started connecting some dots. And it's a beautiful day, man. Like, you know, a lot of people would say it's not a beautiful day because it's raining right now. You guys probably can hear it. But rain, open garage, me training, me reading about training. It's awesome, man. I love it. Absolutely love it. Anyway, guys, I'll catch you guys tomorrow. Peace out.